Okay, if everyone can begin making their way to their seats, we're glad you're here. If you will, open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 18. That is where we're going to spend nearly all of our time this morning, in Matthew 18. Doing a little bit of catch-up, we are going to cover the latter section of what we have in our material is week 26, cover hopefully all of week 27, and then we should be nearly caught back up, I believe. Of course, in 2010 on Sunday mornings, we're walking through the life and times of Jesus the Christ. And a couple of parallel accounts that we're going to briefly note in just a little while, but we'll spend the majority of our time in Matthew 18. Glad that you're here. Glad there aren't any leaks in this building this morning. And looking forward to our time together. Before we begin, if you will, let's bow and have a word of prayer together. Our great and awesome Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity to express to you as family, as brothers and sisters in Christ, our praise and our adoration and our thanksgiving for you and to you. Thank you for this great opportunity, and thank you for all who are here this morning. We pray that you would be with those who are continuing to make their way here, and please be with us throughout the day as we do our best to offer the sacrifice of praise to you and seek to be an encouragement to each other. We thank you for your word, and especially this morning for the Gospels that tell us the great story of your Son. Help us to have ears to hear His great and challenging teachings this morning. Help us to see Him with eyes of faith and to have open and receptive hearts to these clear and life-changing teachings. Help us to listen in view of having Christ-like attitudes. Help us to listen in view of being like children and being willing always to forgive. Help us to feel this morning, as best we can, as humanly possible, the weight of our own sinfulness and our desperate need for your grace and your mercy. We are in awe of that and cannot find the words to express to you our thanksgiving for that. Please be with us throughout the day, and it is through Jesus that we offer our prayer this morning. Amen. Okay, Matthew chapter 18. We're going to be in verse 1 in just a moment. Before we do, look back at Matthew 17 and verse 22. What we've got in the latter part of Matthew 16, into Matthew 17, into Matthew 18, very, very much appears to be a relatively short span of time. And Matthew 18 is another long discourse of great teaching from Jesus. But I want you to hear the echo of what these men who are following Jesus had just recently heard. Matthew 17 and verse 22, for instance, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill Him, and He will be raised on the third day." A little before that, Matthew 16, you look up at verse 24. Matthew 16:24, Jesus told His disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." And goes on to deliver those familiar statements about saving your life versus losing it. These are the kinds of things these men have heard historically leading up to what we've got as Matthew 18 and the first verse of the chapter. Before we read that, there are obviously a variety of answers to the question, but when it comes to our attitudes and our interactions with one another, what sort of things do we as human beings struggle with the most? Lots of answers to those questions, but if you try and come up with common, across the human spectrum, what do we struggle with the most as far as our attitudes and interactions with each other? That's a deep question at the beginning of Sunday morning, isn't it? Go ahead, Nancy.
I would think self-centered.
Self-centeredness has absolutely got to be up towards the top of the list. No doubt about it. That has impact on my attitude, but not only my attitude, my interactions with other people. What else? Self-centeredness. Go ahead. I'm sorry? Connection. Being connected with one another and maybe maintaining those connections with one another. Paul?
Well, maybe fall same. Communication.
Okay. Communication, yeah. Can be difficult, challenging, and sometimes awkward. You know, there are two big root issues in Matthew 18. And they're split right down the middle, really, in what we have as that 18th chapter. Issues of pride and self-centeredness, and issues of forgiveness. Greatness and forgiveness. Pride and grudges are right there at the heartbeat of Matthew 18. Alan, go ahead. You had your hand raised.
What comes next is 18:1. I think it all ties into that.
Yeah. That's the first section here where we're going to talk about self-centeredness and pride. And remember what we read, the echoes of what we have in Matthew 16, Matthew 17. That's what those men have heard. And then here we are. We're on the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee. We've spent a lot of time here. We're in the area of Capernaum. We've talked about the synagogue that is there that Jesus spends a lot of time in. Matthew 18 and verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus. Jesus has obviously delivered a number of teachings to them. They come to Him with the question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, with the echoes of Matthew 16 and Matthew 17, what ought to be fresh in their ears and in their minds, why do you ask that kind of question? Matthew 18 and verse 1. Because we got a problem with self-centeredness and pride and issues of greatness, right? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And that kind of thing should have been echoing in light of Matthew 16, Matthew 17, those statements about what He was going to do. He is the king of this kingdom, of course. And if He's going to do this, shouldn't that have an impact on their issue of, or their conception of greatness within the kingdom of heaven? Right now, we're not getting there. Okay, there's some disconnect. And we've noted before already some arguments, and the arguments are going to continue between this small band of closest followers about prominence and how I rank against you and what we can look forward to once this grand kingdom is established. Now the question, of course, is why, out of all of the things that Jesus could draw on here on the beautiful northern shores of the Sea of Galilee, we've noted Him taking basic everyday things on several occasions and making powerful points, whether it be fields or seeds or trees or sheep or any number of things. Why on this occasion, in connection with greatness in the kingdom of heaven, does Jesus use a child? What do you think He's getting at there? Why, as we flesh out that illustration, what's He getting at? Alan, and then back here. Go ahead.
A child is innocent.
Okay.
But a child is vulnerable.
Okay.
And has to have direction.
Okay.
From its parents. The same way thing happens to us.
Okay. Innocence and vulnerability, and they need direction. Go ahead.
The use of a child is such a powerful metaphor for what He's trying to teach them.
Okay.
The child is young and is dependent upon someone greater to fulfill its needs. And if you're seeking to be the greatest, then you're seeking to be the one providing the needs, the one everyone's looking up to, depending upon. And Christ says that if that's your mindset, to be the one who's everyone's dependent upon, then you won't be dependent upon God. You won't give any service to Him in His kingdom. You have got to learn to be dependent upon God.
Okay, so dependence and humility are issues there. Anything else, Nancy?
Children are very quick to forgive again.
Okay, we're going to talk about forgiveness here in just a little while, and it's remarkable how easily children get past whatever is disharmony there is and move on from that. Dave?
I was just going to add the quality of being inquisitive.
Okay, inquisitive.
The question.
Naturally curious. They want to hear, they want to see, they want to touch, they want to climb, whatever it is. Eric?
They don't have any reason to be proud.
Okay.
And he was talking, they were saying he was the greatest. It was obviously appealing to their pride.
Okay.
I mean, he's a child who had no reason to be proud to show him that what you need to be like.
Okay. All of those absolutely are help us wrap our minds around why perhaps Jesus uses this very familiar figure, everyday figure that people could see. I want to throw one more in this whole thing. We talk a lot of times about the social standing of women 2,000 years ago and how different that is today versus it was then. Children, very, very much the same kind of thing. You know, in the Western world, children have special rights and privileges and are generally looked out for. Not so much in the ancient Middle Eastern world. We're going to note here in just a little while, latter part of the chapter, I mean, children could be used as basically property. Just like women 2,000 years ago in many regards were viewed as property, children were regarded as property as well. And so, not only do we have all of those qualities, but then we lay the cultural norm on top of it 2,000 years ago. When we're talking about a child, we're talking about someone with no social standing whatsoever. Okay? And so yes, all of these characteristics and qualities, and then when these men looked at these children, you know, they're nobody until they grow up. And especially they're nobody if it is a little girl. But Jesus calls this child and says, unless you become like that. And he doesn't touch, first of all, on issues of greatness in the kingdom of heaven. It's not that, well, you can be a part of the kingdom of heaven, but you're not going to be great in the kingdom of heaven unless you become like a child. No, what does he say? He says there in verse 3, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. It's not like, well, you know, I'm going to be a part of God's kingdom, but maybe I just won't humble myself, and so I'll squeak by, and I'll be a second-tier citizen in the kingdom of heaven. No. It doesn't work like that. Jesus lays out very clearly. Just like he said, very similar language in John 3 as he talks with Nicodemus, unless you are born again, you will never see or enter the kingdom of heaven. Same kind of thing here. But whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, you want to talk about entrance into, and you want to talk about greatness in the kingdom of heaven. Here I've been talking about crosses, and the 12 of you are dreaming of thrones, but unless you accept the status of a nobody, you can't even enter the kingdom of heaven. And then he moves from there to, okay, how are these children going to treat one another within the kingdom? Verse 5, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Now that's serious. You know, it's one thing to be tempted. And it's one thing to watch as other people are tempted. But it's another thing entirely to be a source of temptation in the life of someone else. How do we do that? How can we be guilty of that in modern American contexts being stumbling blocks, to use another word that's common in the New Testament, same kind of connotation. How can we be stumbling blocks to the people around us? A lot of times we talk about the devil and we talk about evil forces of darkness over this present age. Any way that we can cause a problem in the lives of others? Gordon?
There's a lot of ways. In fact, there are some ways that we can cause others to stumble, but the thing that they would stumble in is not wrong within itself, but until they reach a certain level where they feel that it can see that it's okay to do it, and then if we cause them to do it and say, well, that's done away with on the cross. Well, when you first obey the gospel, you don't understand all that.
Yeah. The Apostle Paul talks a lot about not just matters of sin, but matters of conscientious judgment and opinion, and even being willing to go so far in avoiding putting a stumbling block in other people's ways as sacrificing my own rights and esteeming the judgments and the opinions and the interests of other people ahead of myself. That's what someone of no social standing would do, right? Dave, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just thinking about there in 3 John where he talks about Diotrephes.
Okay.
I think that's an example. I mean, he was a leader. He loved to have preeminence. I mean, he was a stumbling block for many in the church.
Okay.
Trying to do the right thing. I mean, because of his selfless ambition.
Yeah. Going back to this root idea of pride that Jesus is talking about. Alan and then Eric.
Makes a quotation in Matthew 10 and 40, 41st and 42nd. It says, whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me.
Okay. Eric, go ahead.
A lot of my point has been said already by the three gentlemen.
Okay.
But I was about to say, a lot of times we don't even know that we're a stumbling block because of our pride blinding us from that. Like we could, in and of ourselves, have good intentions, but then, because it's our way or our motives more than God's, it becomes a stumbling block and we don't even know it.
Yeah. Maybe I have very good intentions and I'm just not taking the time to think about the interests and the opinions and the judgments and the vulnerabilities of others. Maybe it's that I just don't care. You mind your own business, I'll mind my own business. Your faults and foibles are your own, and I'll just kind of do my own thing. And if you can't control yourself, then that's not my problem. But that's not the attitude of someone with very low social standing, someone who's meek and receptive and innocent like we have been talking about. Of course, there are many, many, many ways that we can be stumbling blocks. By the use of our mouths, right? By inviting someone to participate in sinful talk, sinful discourse, throwing open that door of opportunity by what I say, or by the way that I dress, or by the things that I don't say, or by the places that I go and the things that I involve myself in. The New Testament is very, very, very big on not only thinking about how God feels and what God wants, but about the feelings and the vulnerabilities and the interests and the judgments of other people ahead of myself. That is what a servant would do. That's not someone who is great socially, generally speaking. That's not something they're gonna be concerned about, but that's what a servant is concerned about. I'm going to make sure that you eat before I do. I'm going to make sure that you're taken care of before I'm taken care of. I'm going to make sure that you're comfortable before I'm comfortable. That is the pathway of a servant 2,000 years ago, and that's what we're talking about. Jesus says for the one who would not pay any attention to that, better to have a millstone hung around his neck. You and I don't typically see many millstones. This is in that same ancient Capernaum complex, an ancient millstone where you would have grapes or a variety of different things could be placed in this, and this large millstone rolled around there. You're not going to swim with that around your neck, are you? Not at all. And so Jesus is encouraging us to think about our interactions with God's children. There are some who are innocent children of God. We continue reading verse 7. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptation come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes. And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into the hell of fire. First time these men have heard that? No. Where did they hear that months before this? That last paragraph that we read. What's that commonly referenced from? Yeah, Matthew 5, right? Sermon on the Mount. This is not the first time these men have heard this. But what he's trying to get across, repetition-wise, you lose your hand, that's bad, but there is something greater at stake here than your hand. You live the rest of your life without a hand, that's going to be difficult, but there is something greater, more enduring, more lasting, more precious than your hand. This is not a game. This is not a spiritual buffet. This is the creed of the kingdom of heaven. And it's got to begin with selflessness. And putting my soul ahead of my body. And putting the souls of other people even ahead of my own interests. And my own preferences and my own opinions. Verse 10, we move from this figure of children. We're going to come back to it, but to sheep. Still the same basic point. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, one of God's children. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Lots of speculation about verse 10, obviously, and an interesting statement that we can speculate about, but the bottom line is, what we do know is, angelic beings beyond what we're able to see with our physical eyes are interested in what's going on right here, right? Regardless of what we do or we don't know what we would like to know about angels, that comes across loud and clear from verse 10, right? It's not just us. It's not just here on the earth, human beings, everything that we can see and feel and hear with our ears. There's more going on here. There is a dimension that we cannot see. There is a dimension of accountability where we're all going to be ushered into, and you may not be concerned about the people around you, but the angels of God are. Which means you ought to take a cue from them, right? Is what Jesus is getting across. This familiar illustration of a man who has 100 sheep and one wanders away. That man, even though he's got 99 who are left, is still concerned about the one. This whole section from verse 1 all the way down through verse 14 is about my conception of myself and greatness and what greatness in the kingdom of heaven is all about. Greatness in the kingdom of heaven is about putting the king obviously ahead of myself and being more aware and more concerned with the subjects of the king, the children within the household of God, even ahead of myself. We said there's two big issues here, right? In Matthew 18. There's an issue of pride and greatness, and there's an issue of forgiveness. We've been talking about, okay, what if a child of God is innocent? What if a child of God is harmless? What if a child of God has been caught in some sort of weakness and we naturally feel empathy for them? But it's another thing if a child of God isn't so innocent. Second half of Matthew 18. Look at verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children, those who are commonly viewed as property in that ancient context, and all that he had in payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me and I will pay you. He refused and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me, and should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Okay. You and I can read right over that and not necessarily feel the weight of what's going on there. We'll go back as we have time and look at the first part of what we read. To impress on the mind of Peter kingdom character, Jesus uses this illustration. Here's a man, he's called before the king. It's not that the king is taxing him. It's not that the king is requesting a loan. It's what this man owes this king. Somehow, in this illustration of Jesus, this man has come to owe 10,000 talents. Now, 1 talent for an average working man in Galilee, as best we can tell, is 20 years worth of labor. Somehow, some way, this man has racked up a debt that he's going to have to work 73 million days to pay off to the king. 200,000 years worth of work this man is in debt. I don't know about you, but that's hard for me to wrap my mind around. And that's intentional, right? And he falls down. The king says, sell this man, sell his wife, sell his child, sell everything he has, and it's not going to come anywhere near this debt, but you put him away. There is no excuse for a man that racks up that kind of debt. And the man falls down and he pleads, and the king says, okay. Then the guy goes out and he finds a fellow servant who owes him 100 days worth of labor. Now that's a little easier for us to wrap our minds around. You know, you do a big home improvement project, you buy a nice new car, and you're going to be in a pretty significant amount of debt. Here is a fellow servant, owes this man who has been forgiven 200,000 years worth of debt. He's got a fellow servant who owes him about 100 days worth of labor. Perspective. That is, ballpark, 1/600,000th. It's maybe been a while since you worked on fractions, but that's big, right? We can all agree that's big. His fellow servant owes him 1/600,000th of what he owed and was forgiven, and he grabs the guy by the neck and says, you owe me and you're going to pay. Now, what does Jesus want Peter to grasp from that illustration? We take that and we transpose it on real life, and what are we talking about? Go ahead.
The nature of God's forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah, I think that comes through loud and clear with our first one, right? Who is the man who owes 200,000 years worth of labor to the king? We look in the mirror, right? That's me. That's you. We sing, "Oh, to grace, how great a debtor." That's me. Those aren't just poetic words. It is a debt that we cannot wrap our minds around. And the king has every right to say, you're done. You've blown it. And you wicked, lazy, self-centered servant who didn't live in any sort of view of accountability, you get everything that's coming to you. But we fall on our face before Him, and He says, I'm willing to forgive. Eric, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the message that I get out of this is you should forgive as your Father.
Yeah, that's the second half, right? Peter, number one, needs to understand. You and I, number one, need to understand. It's one thing to say you need to forgive other people. But it's another thing to say that once it settles in on you how much you have been forgiven. And it makes this man look rather foolish, doesn't it? And it reveals where the heart of this man really is. And just how concerned he is about what he feels like he has coming to him. So first of all, feel the weight of that, and then we go back to the question. In 2,000 years ago, ancient Israel, your common rabbi would say, even in preserved teachings today, how often ought you to forgive a brother who sins against you? 3 times. Now what does Peter do? Peter takes that and he doubles it and he has one more. And has a pretty good idea probably. This is going to be a good question. We've just been talking about greatness and we've just been talking about how we stack up. And I bet if I ask this question, it's going to make me look pretty good. Maybe that's not what goes through his mind, but it's sure not hard to imagine, right? I'll double it and I'll even add one. How often should I forgive a brother who sins against me? And so first of all, Peter, you need to understand how much you have been forgiven. And then I'm not going to say 7 times, I'm going to say 70 times 7. And I want you to understand that if you are the one who has been sinned against, you don't wait, you don't just sit and wait for that person to come to you and make it right, and then you'll determine whether or not they're worthy of your forgiveness. No, you go to them. And what's the goal? To put your brother in your place, in his place, to shame him? No, the goal is to gain your brother. Right? That's the goal. And if it doesn't work there, then rooted deep in the old law of Moses, this idea of 2 or 3 witnesses. And if that doesn't work, you continue on. Because the ultimate goal is the salvation of that brother or sister's soul. Right? And that soul is so valuable, God is willing to forgive an amount that you cannot even fathom. And so who am I when I sit in a position not of low standing, not of humility, but some sort of self-exalted stature in my own mind and say, you know, I'm not willing to forgive you. Comes through loud and clear, doesn't it? I appreciate your kind attention this morning. I know we've had to move rather quickly this morning. Matthew 18, definitely. If you have more that you'd like to talk about with that, please feel free to do that. Lord willing, next Sunday morning we will be in week number 28, and John chapter 7 will be our primary scripture. If you don't have material, that's up here on the front pew. Thank you for being here.